Okay, you ready? Everything you always wanted to know about assessments, but were afraid to ask. An interesting conversation. The assessment world is one of the most confusing markets really out there in the business world. And today we're going to talk about some of the things that help you navigate that to find the tools that you need. Who am I? I'm the Chairman and Chief Knowledge Officer for Celebrate Strengths. I've created 7 psychometric instruments and over 500 products driven by psychometric instruments. I'm an expert witness on the business applications of psychometrics. I've reviewed hundreds of assessments. I'm a national expert and have been the national expert for several major instruments. Today, our objective is education. What are the qualitative differences in assessment products? And what are the application differences in assessment products? There's no selling today, simply education. There are over 80,000 occupationally related assessments. The quality differences are tremendous. Most buyers cannot see them. Street drugs have a similar market. The assessment market is filled with long outdated products, ridiculously high prices, complex information that requires consultants to understand it, unnecessary training, awkward profiling methodologies, and events that do little to impact the enterprise. There are a number of mistaken beliefs that further cloud decision-making and shopping for assessments. One is that if it seems accurate, it must be good. The problem with that is that almost any assessment is going to seem fairly good. It's going to seem fairly accurate. That's because of a thing called the P.T. Barnum effect, which we may talk about a little bit later. But the P.T. Barnum effect basically says that if you write a generalized description of personality traits, or horoscopes actually for the same thing, people will tend to subconsciously pick out the parts that seem accurate and discard the parts that weren't. So therefore, that's been a common practice for selling inexpensive or low-end tests. They'll come in and say, here, test 3 or 4 people. People would look at them and say, this is really cool. Let's do it with 25 other people, or let's do it with the rest of the company. And that was a good sales process. Secondly, if it's been used for years, it must be good. I've heard companies basically trumpet the concept that they've been selling this test for over 50 years. Okay, if someone was selling the same telephones that they used 50 years ago, I don't think any of us would be excited. You probably wouldn't be excited about the phone that you were using 5 years ago. Somehow, because people don't really see the differences, everything comes out of a printer, nice, slick, clean, they assume that it must be current. Counseling tools are good for business applications. There are a lot of wonderful psychometric instruments that were specifically developed to start a relationship, a counseling relationship, to be a starting point for discussions about someone. And that's a totally different world than making hiring decisions or actually using it for talent management. Last, quality assessments are expensive. Today, they're not. It's a digital world. And then lastly, consultants are necessary to use top assessments. Certainly they have been sold that way. There's a number of assessments that are actually built to require consultants so that it becomes a great tool to sell to consultants because it gives them something to add to their bag. Newsflash, it's a digital world. Today, products should be easy to use, lower prices, integrate with business processes. Oh, and I love the little way the little bar here for Zoom is exactly where my last line is. And multi-purposed. So you can do a lot more with tests today. 2 of the misleading concepts in the assessment market, one is validation, and the other, it was right about me. mentioned it earlier, Barnum. Validation is probably the most misunderstood part. The problem has a little bit to do with how we use that word. There's an implication if something is valid that someone has approved it, that it has achieved some mark that says it's okay. I've looked at, probably reviewed somewhere over 200 tests over the last 25 years. I have not found one yet that did not have some type of validation document, some type of statistics. I've seen excellent tests with wonderful data that had 3 pages stapled together and probably a 3rd generation copy. I know another test that's incredibly prominent in the business world today that's got a hardback validation document that's so complex that no one in the world could understand it, which is intentional because it's gibberish. It basically looks the part, plays the part, very much like a prop in a movie. People look at it and say, this must be good if it's got all this data. So again, it did some crazy ones. There's one common instrument that they validated only with a population of about 200 dentists. There was a famous instrument that really measured honesty, and it was an honesty integrity test, and it was validated with a prison population. I've never been able to figure that one out. And also, validated doesn't mean it will work for you. The fact that something is valid really doesn't mean it's going to be the right thing for you to use. So a better way to look at that is, what does this contribute to my decision-making process? Again, the simplest ones will seem accurate. This is what I mentioned earlier, the P.T. Barnum effect. Foray was actually the first one who did studies like that. Accuracy is easy. The hard part is application, bringing true data, true information to a decision-making process inside a business. The question is not, is this one better than that one? The question is, will it solve a problem for you? Will it access the potential of your people? Will it work within your business process? Will it make the enterprise more profitable? Most importantly, will it positively change the lives of the people? Because today that's possible. And that should be at the forefront of how we use that kind of information. Again, it's not a question of whether this one is right or wrong or better or worse. Every instrument at some point in time was part of the best thinking of that day and age. Of course, that's how everything is, isn't it? At one time, we thought the earth was flat, and this is what happened when you got to the edge. We thought atoms looked like that. When I remember science class, we thought this is what they were. Well, quantum theory shattered that. That's not really what they look like. X-rays were an astonishing breakthrough at one point in time, but today, compared to an MRI, they seem primitive. The nature of science is to move forward, to look deeper, to look at what lies beneath. The sciences of psychology and psychometrics have literally leapt forward over the last 20 years. Now we know what lies beneath. We can see the foundation. Some of the quality factors that you find, and I'm going to tell you how to see some of these in an easy way, is the psychometric science and the item type. We don't write items the way we did 50 years ago. The psychological construct, that means, what are we really measuring? Today we measure things off a concept that pretty much is universally agreed, called the Big Five personality factors. That means that there's been so much research done that everyone in psychology of any merit says, okay, this makes sense. We agree. This is a good model. Before then, that wasn't the way we thought. Back in the 40s and even the 50s, people had all kinds of different ideas that now we know they weren't exactly right. It's not that they were totally wrong. It just didn't see clearly as you do today. The methodology of how they're used, how they fit with business applications. A lot of assessments were born in a research project, and therefore they were originally disconnected from business, and so sometimes it's a little awkward to fit them together again. Ease of use, cost of use, what else is out there in the market? What are my choices? Too many times, one of the times I told someone, I said, I think you were sold these assessments, you didn't actually buy them, because a salesperson came in and explained it very clearly, but you really didn't know any options. You didn't have any alternatives. So basically you bought it. So you really want to know what else is out there. Most assessments, the vast bulk of them, sort individuals into an artificial construct or model that's based on a particular consultant's ideas or theories. The oldest one of these, by the way, is DISC, which Hippocrates first postulated that there were 4 kinds of people in the world. This is thousands of years ago. He said they were choleric, melancholic, sanguine, and phlegmatic. He didn't have a marketing department. Those were terrible words. Question I always ask, what's the right way to slice a pizza? There really isn't one, is there? You can do whatever you like. So I refer to the sort people into categories as pizza tests. DISC, for example, has 4 slices of pizza. The DISC, Myers-Briggs has 16 slices. Predictive Index has 4. StrengthsFinder has 34. Herman Brain Dominance has a model that has 4 parts. The Enneagram has 9. The problem with those is they provide an absolutely fascinating discussion. It's a wonderful experience. I've done almost every one of these. You can have wonderful conversations. Everybody walks away having learned something. The problem is it's difficult to connect that with business processes. The more advanced assessments are measuring what we know now are hardwired personality traits. That means that they don't really change over time. You don't affect them with training or management or coaching. And also cognitive abilities, how people think and how they learn. And all of these are based on a normal bell curve of the population. In other words, you test a lot of people and you know where most people fall. So that allows you to have something to compare one person to the other. Here are the big 5 personality traits that I mentioned earlier. They also didn't have a lot of help with marketing because neuroticism is just not a term that leaps off the tongue. Agreeableness, openness to new experience, conscientiousness, extroversion. There are other versions of the big 5 that are the same model, but they use different words. Each of the big 5 also have what are called 6 facets, which are subcategories within those. So all in all, you have these 30 little mini pieces. And all of these have been shown to be present in people. It doesn't mean that all of those are meaningful in the business world, but some of them are. So when we think of a normative instrument, what we're thinking of is the distribution across the population. In other words, if we think of just being assertive, half the people in the world are assertive. They're okay with confrontation. They're okay with discussion, debate. Half the people in the world really don't like discussions. They don't like arguments. They don't want to challenge anything. They wake up in the morning and they say, I want to do a great job today if somebody will just tell me what to do. The other end of the scale, people wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do a great job today if people will just do what I tell them to do. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that, but if you get the picture, that's what a normative instrument is. Half the people in the world can sell things, half the people can't. Half the people in the world can manage other people, half the people don't want to manage other people. We could pick something else too. Half the people in the world like to have their world scheduled so they know what happens next. They love details. They like to get into the fine points of anything. The other half of the bell curve, they don't really care about details. They look at the big picture. They're also spontaneous. They like to go with the flow. You can also look at the middle. We got 50% of the population is in the middle of the bell curve. That means that they're a little bit of both. They're people who are neither extreme. They tend to be, this is where the average population is. And they get along with everybody. A lot of positive things come from there. When you look out at the ends, those 25% that are out there on the extremes, these are the people who are wake up in the morning with a new idea every day, or people who wake up and they're going to do it the same way they've always done it. They bring stability to a business. We could go through a lot of things, but that's essentially what a normal bell curve, what a normative instrument does. One of the ways that is most common out there with some of the instruments that have, shall we say, better data is they profile top performers. That's the concept. We're going to test your best people. We're going to create a pattern or a template, and you can hire people and see how closely they match that pattern or template. The problem is that's primarily a sales technique. It's not the best way to do things. It means that you can send average salesperson out, can go into a business and say, I bet you'd like to have more people like your best people. The average business person is going to say, of course I would. Well, would it make sense then for us to test those top people, see what they look like, then you can hire more people who look like that? It makes all the sense in the world, and so that makes a good way to have a sales team work. The problems get into, it's hard to identify top performers. Everyone doesn't have the same idea about what a top performer is. We did a project for a sales company one time, and when asked what their top performers were, they gave us an assortment of people. One of them was the highest revenue, one was the highest margins, one sold the greatest percentage of new products, one had the longest retention of their people, and one wonderful person, they said they didn't have any numbers yet, but they had a hunch they were going to be a star. Well, if you try and create a pattern out of all of that, it's going to be a mess. The other thing that happens is managers make a difference. We see that in sports all the time where someone who doesn't do so well on this team traded to the other team, and all of a sudden they blossom because that manager really connects with them differently. The same thing happens in this world. So you also have things that are really not statistically solid. If you want a statistically reliable number, you'd like to have a sample of 20% of the group, which means 1 out of 5, and 15 would be a really solid number statistically. So that means that 75 people in a particular job can give you a decent statistical sample. There's very few jobs out here, and certainly in larger companies, but for the average company, they don't have 75 people in any one job. It's also a way to lose good candidates because you're blending everything together. And so what you end up with is this person is a 75% match to that profile, and we're only hiring people who are at 80. Well, that was muddy. We don't know what that person really was. We just got a general idea. It's a quick way to hire bad hires. The best instrument that uses profiling the most effective way, I have a sample for a persuasive salesperson who's a 92% match to the model. The missing 8% is that they can't ask somebody to buy anything. Bit of a problem. It's like having a parachute that is a wonderful color. It fits comfortably. It's very easy to use, but it doesn't open. What you want to use information for is to recognize the problem sometime. It's a lot more effective. The other thing is that psychometrics is a science. I want to underline that because it's continually evolving. And just like phones, the newest generations of assessments are not only easier to use, but they have infinitely greater capabilities. Classic assessments were designed purely for a hiring thing or a team building thing. And once that's done, that was pretty much the show. Today, you want data to be agile so that you can use it, because if I've got data that tells me how this human being does things, how they think, how they learn, how they behave in any kind of a job or any kind of situation, well, I just got the handbook for how to manage them, how to manage their talent, how to help them optimize in whatever job is the best one for them. I have extraordinary potentials there. And so that's what's available today. Lastly, I want to, because a lot of this may sound complicated, I hope I've awakened you to some things, but the easiest way to see some of the older assessments is to look at the items. Those are the questions. The items are the questions. They really indicate the age or the quality of the assessment, regardless of what the sales pitch or the fact that the marketing materials are knockout and were created last week and they look jazzier than the Dickens. The simplest way or the checklist, one of the earliest ways or types of assessment was an adjective checklist. And the most common ones, it used to, when it was on paper, on one side it said, check the words that most describe you, and then you turn it over and check the words that your friends would describe you with. Well, that was originally designed by David Merrill to be a counseling tool. That means that you came in to see Dr. Jones, and Dr. Jones really didn't know you. So Dr. Jones says, hey, John, why don't you use this? And it took a few minutes, and then he could look at it and he could talk about, John, why did you pick these words? Let's talk about that it gave him a starting point. The problem that you have in using this as a hiring tool is if you look at this, if we just had a typical job, a management job, a sales job, if you look at the red checks, I don't think anyone's checking aimless, bossy, combative, awkward, or defensive. That's not going to help them get hired. Instead, they're going to look for the star ones, which is I'm assured, I'm cheerful, I'm cooperative, I'm dependable. So while this may have served well as a counseling kickoff, it doesn't work at all from a hiring standpoint. The next most common is a forced choice. That's something almost everybody in the business world has done at some point in time. Check the word that most describes you, check the word that least describes you. Usually there's 28 of them. Those were originally designed by William Marston in 1928. He also, by the way, created Wonder Woman because he was one of the original people who worked on the lie detector. And that's why her golden lasso made people tell the truth. But, so we've got a forced choice test. What this did, it solved the problem of the checklist so that people really couldn't see exactly what they were answering. It was more abstract how I was answering. The problem with forced choice test, we've got two people, we got you and me. You checked cheerful is the most, precise is the least. I checked the same words. It looks like we're the same. Let's look at that a little deeper. To you, that question was like saying, between cake, candy, ice cream, and pie, which do you like the most and which do you like the least? And you're saying, I love them all. But you had to do something, so you picked cake for the most and pie for the least. I looked at those same words that we had, and to me, it was like ice cream, pine straw, sand, and tar. My gosh, those are far apart. You know, I could pick ice cream, but golly, the others is just, all of them are awful. We created the same answers, but we're not close to the same people. The problem with any kind of instrument like this is you don't know what the gap was between the most and the least. So it actually, this is a kind of another way to look at it that makes sense. You can't compare things from that type of instrument. That's like I chose Chinese food. Did you choose Chinese food because it's your favorite? Because you like Chinese food better than the other choices? Is it that you just didn't like any of the other choices and Chinese food was okay, I guess? Or you just don't care what you eat? All of those produce the same answer. I chose Chinese food. If you're making business decisions, hiring decisions, talent management decisions, you got to know what was the bottom line here. What drove that answer? Because all of these are totally different. If you want to look and see some other things and explore some of these ideas in more detail, there is a place called aboutassessments.com. I created it 3 or 4 years ago. Doesn't sell a single solitary thing. It talks more about validation. It talks about emotional intelligence, talks about ways to identify quality things and match them to what you're trying to do. So it's a neutral site that educates people really well. My company's site is Best Work Data, and you're welcome to go there. I'm absolutely open to questions now, and I appreciate you listening to this.
What are some of the red flags to look for when choosing an assessment?
Okay, good question. What are the red flags to look for? I can think of a couple of assessment salespeople I've known in the past, and if you saw one of them coming, you should run. Not easy to see the red flag. I think I put those items in there because those are two that I think you really want to pay attention to, because there are a lot of people who are selling products, and to the best of their knowledge, they're good and they're solid products. They're not out there trying to sell something old. They're not trying to sell something that's not going to work or whatever. They just don't know. That's why I think the items, if someone's trying to sell you an adjective checklist, I wanted to make you aware that, wait a second, that's not going to work. The person can do something. The same as with force choice tests. They're great if you want a little team building thing or something like that. Peachy, but you don't want to do hiring decisions with those. I think you always want to have some options. In other words, if you're only talking to one person, then that's the only thing that you're going to be able to get. And the world is changing rapidly in there. There are instruments, somebody the other day hit a new high. They said that they had a test that was $475 each. And then you had to pay the consultant to help you with it. I've had prices go down to $5. Anything in between. I've heard the same product being sold for $150 down to $5, and they're identical. So I think the biggest red flag, I would look at about assessments, because it will take the item thing a little bit further than I did today. Another question? Okay, well, we've got people who are listening beautifully. I can't believe you don't have any questions. Uh, I this is I'll share a couple of things with you that to kind of give you a scope of this. One of the instruments that actually I think is one of the top two or three out there in the world. I'm not using any names for any of these today. It was one of the first to, in 1993, was the first time a serious psychometric instrument was created specifically to correlate with job behavior. I found this on the web for a psychometric instrument. About this. Good. Siri's talking to me. I love it when she does that. But in 1993, this instrument was created, and they did some extraordinary studies. They tested, I believe it was people in over 200 companies. They range from sales companies to manufacturing companies to software companies, a really broad set of people. And when they did nothing more than simply match people to the jobs, in other words, if it was a complex job, they made sure that you learned quickly and you could handle complex stuff. If it was a sales job, they made sure that you were assertive and could ask for the order. And if it was a detailed financial job or software development job, they made sure that you were good with details. If they did nothing more than do that at a rather broad scale, the average across the 200 companies, the average increase in productivity was 25%. That's the power of this. When I saw those numbers was when my interest in this became ignited. And I said, you can change people's lives. You can change business with this kind of stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that's possible. The thing that I saw that limited things, anytime that someone is asking you to use something that requires a consultant to do it, it's typically not a great idea. The reason is because, and I think I was a consultant for a long time, and I'm not against consulting, but if I'm selling you a tool and I have to be there for you to really use that tool, number one, you're not going to be able to use it with a lot of people. And if it's really good, you should use it with a lot of people. In other words, when you really understand what assessments today can do, every success that you've ever had in your life, the foundation of it was in your hardwired strengths and abilities. Every failure or challenge you've had in your life, was because of those same things. The more specifically you understand your own strengths and abilities, the better you're able to position yourself and make better life decisions. It doesn't mean everything is a smooth road. It means that, for example, I'm as low as it's possible to measure on details. The fact that I know that has me set alerts on calendars. It makes me take notes more than I might normally do. It has me, I basically have a thing with all of my clients that I said, if I ever tell you that I'm going to call you, please tell me not to and that you will call me. Because I can guarantee you I'm going to forget it some percentage of times because I'm just not good with details. It allows me to do things. It's a joke among my clients that, no, don't let him call you. We'll call. Because it sounds like a simple thing, but my father graduated from the Citadel, and you can imagine he was a detailed person and a scheduled person, an organized person, and certainly he must have done something bad in another life to have me as a son because I was so different. And yet he continually bought me organizational systems, those wonderful things frequently made in Denmark that had the book that gave you pages to organize your life. Those weren't made for people like me. Those were made for people who were already organized. So, but that's why that's why these things are important. Just pick one. Okay. Another a common question about usage is, when should we use assessments? At what point in our selection process should we use assessments? As early as possible. A great rule of thumb when building an assessment system or selection system is to use the most accurate, most economical thing at the earliest point in time. In other words, interviews are usually expensive, and today there are assessments that for less than a few bucks will tell you if a person can do the job or not. So I'll give you an example. There were 400 people applied for a job for a very, very detailed project management job from a high-end construction company. When they screened out people who were no good with details, who couldn't handle confrontation and couldn't deal with complex jobs, there were 72 left. In other words, whatever that is, 328 people were screened out without an interview because they couldn't do that. That was sort of like the short person showing up to basketball tryouts. Don't need to see them.
How do you know when people take these assessments if they're being truly honest about themselves?
Okay, good question. How do you know that someone's giving you an honest answer? There's two phrases that are used. One is called social desirability. That's kind of a technical term, and that means that people will include a series of items that people who want to present themselves extremely well will tend to do that. And so if you get a high score in social desirability, I like the word faking good better, because faking good gets somebody's attention. And what faking good, which is a common thing in a number of instruments, it's basically you're asking someone to admit what are called universal frailties. It means these are things we've all done. In other words, have you ever finished a project and wished you had done better? No, of course. Have you ever doubted yourself? Well, of course. So there's a set of people, not a relatively small one, who deny those things. In other words, they basically say, I don't have any weaknesses. Okay. It's before we get to how honestly they did anything, you've got someone who's saying, I don't have any weaknesses. It's very difficult to coach those people. Coaching and training becomes nearly impossible. It's just like if someone's an alcoholic, they've got to say I'm an alcoholic before anything can be done. As long as they deny it, nothing happens. I could tell you some crazy stories of people who blew the faking good scale on a particular instrument. And the HR person said, "Could you tell me about that?" And they said, "I can't even relate to the concept of a weakness. I just never have had one." And, I mean, where do you go from there? So when you get down to it, it is extremely difficult to fake or shift a contemporary psych instrument. In other words, the challenge with items is if I said I like to take shortcuts, and you say, well, okay, if I say I like to take shortcuts, they may think I'm going to miss things. So I'm going to say I don't take shortcuts. Well, wait a second. Does that mean I'm a kind of a plotter? I'm not. I don't move along. So it becomes very difficult for someone to know what good is. What's the right answer? So, yeah, you can. If you're using contemporary stuff, it's going to be pretty reliable.
Should you only be measuring for just the behaviors, or are there other things that you can measure?
Should you just be measuring for behaviors? Look, there's a kind of a thing. One of the common things today, certainly people talk a lot about culture. They talk about culture in the business world. We want people to match our culture. Okay, that sounds wonderful. I listened to a very sharp consulting group, and that was their specialty, was culture. And they spent 20, 25 minutes describing how they did this, that, and the other. And they asked me what I thought about it. And I said, I really don't think they're after culture. I think what they're after is a set of behaviors. In other words, you want someone to do something different. I may want you to collaborate more with other people. I may want you to communicate what you're doing. I may want you to take responsibility. But if I can express that in a behavioral sense, we can measure that. That can be seen. Data will tell you that. Assessments can tell you those kinds of things. You can survey for some stuff. You can survey about culture. You can talk about what kind of environment people like and all that. But it becomes a very muddy kind of a thing, like asking people what their favorite food is. You're going to be all over the waterfront trying to draw conclusions. Businesses, I don't think, want culture. They want a behavior. I want people to be warm and friendly with each other. Okay, those are behaviors that we can deal with. I want people to be at work on time. That's a behavior. We can deal with that. I want people to have a sense of urgency about all of those things. Is we can state things in a behavioral sense, that should be the starting point. We can add all kinds of stuff to that. Okay, I think we're pretty much out of time now. I want to thank you if you were enjoyed this. I appreciate it. I hope you answered some questions, filled in some blanks for you. I appreciate you doing this. The most valuable thing we have is the time in our lives, and I appreciate you spending it with us. Have a great day.